17 questions with Bashi. 17 questions with Bachi.
All right. I just want to welcome everybody to the first ever 17 Questions with Bocce. And my first guest is Annie. Hi, Annie. How are you doing this
Hi,
evening?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. As you know, whenever you're doing anything for the very first time, there's so many different things. And full disclosure, because you're seeing it right now, it says powered by StreamYard. I have to use StreamYard, and I am trying to refuse using StreamYard ever since I found out uh Ryan Reynolds has a little bit of an investment in it. But I just had to choose to do it for tonight. So until I figure out what I'm going to do in replacement of it, it is what it is, what it is. So, but I'm going to go through 17 questions with you. And the first 3 are my staple questions that I'm going to ask every content creator. And then the rest come from actual uh like folks from TikTok and YouTube, and some are from my bocce buddies or bocce besties, which are my members on YouTube. So I'll proclaim that whenever that happens. So the first question I have for you, Annie, is what made you decide to start creating content about the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively case?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I've been a fan of Justin's for a long time. I've followed his career for many, many years. And so I was like around for all of the stuff that was happening surrounding the movie and all of the drama around the premiere and all of that, and kind of watching with a lot of interest. And then, you know, and I have a personal connection with two of the Baha'is in the case. I don't know them super well. We're not like besties or anything like that. But I've spoken with two of them. I don't quite know how much to share, so I'm just kind of gonna be on the side of a little bit more reserved and private about that, just to be on the safe side. Not
And
say
frankly, it's nobody else's business.
oh,
Anybody who
right,
tries to
yeah,
invade people's personal lives, no
yeah,
need.
agreed. And so when the New York Times article came out and the CRD and all of that, my first reaction was, "Oh, no." Like, "Oh, no." Both from a, like, personal perspective and from a Baha'i perspective. Like, as I started reading it, I'm like, "She's talking about Justin and Jamie and Steve, like, this is weird." And, but I'm also, like, a believe women person. Like, I firmly believe and still believe that, when allegations are made in the absence of any other information and evidence, that, like, the default should be to believe the person who's making the allegations until there's other information coming out. And so I was, trying really hard to check my own biases as I was reading the New York Times article and the CRD complaint, um, and giving the benefit of the doubt to the person making the allegations, even though I had a personal connection with the people being accused. So that was a weird place to be in. Um, and then as I was reading, though, I got to some places where I was like, okay, like based on what I know that things did not go down the way that they're being alleged here. Like I knew it, I know it. And so, then there's all these questions and everything. And so then, of course, their lawsuit came out and more of the story and all of that. And so I've been following along and following the content creators that talk about this case, which has been really helpful from like the legal standpoint and the PR standpoint to have people who know things about this stuff, because I'm clueless about those parts of it. Um, but I haven't wanted to make content because, I mentioned, if people have seen any of my, videos, that it's really hard to talk about this case without backbiting about the people who are involved. And as a Baha'i, that's something we're supposed to really, really, really strive to avoid. And I was trying to figure out if there was a way to talk about parts of the case that I feel like people might benefit from understanding from a Baha'i standpoint without doing that. And so it took me a long, long, long time to sort of feel like A, I was gonna be able to do it, and B, that it was, like, time. Because my feeling is that they have tried to sort of, like, keep the Baha'i Faith, like, not a central part of the case, And but as I started seeing and you were sharing more like misinformation about the Baha'i faith being put into different places online, I was like, okay, it's probably time to just kind of clear some things up, maybe share some insights that might give people a little more context and just mitigate some of the misinfo that's out there. So,
Yeah. And you kind of already answered it, but what lens or perspective do you bring to this case that shapes how you talk about it?
yeah. So, I am a Baha'i, so I'm coming at it from a Baha'i lens, which I know people might assume is like, oh, well, these guys are Baha'is, therefore I'm on their side. But that's really actually not the way that I see it. I really did, like I said, I gave Blake's allegations a fair assessment as much as I could. Um, and, again, I made a video about how, truthfulness and justice, kindness are all very emphasized in the Baha'i faith. And that's the lens really that I'm coming at this from. What is actually true? Where has injustice taken place in this case? And what does justice, what's it going to look like? And of course, there's a part of me too that's looking at things through their lens as Baha'is, like not through their personal lens, because obviously I can't get into these, their heads or anything like that. But, um, I've been a Baha'i for basically my whole life. I have a very solid sense of like, obviously not all Baha'is think the same way, but there is a Baha'i perspective that's a thing. And so that's the lens that I'm looking at it through.
Yeah. And when people tell you your content really resonates with them, what do you think they're connecting with most?
Yeah. I think that what's missing for a lot of people, and I know it's missing for me, other than in this for these specific people, is sort of not knowing what's motivating the people that are involved in the case. Like, we can't know who these people really are, right? Like, I don't know what's the motivation for any of them doing the things that they're doing or the things that we're seeing in the case or whatever. Um, I don't know what kind of lives they're trying to live. I don't know what their ultimate goals are. Like, but with the Baha'is that are in this case, I do have a sense of that. Um, and I'll talk a little bit more about like why I feel like able to say that. Because again, it's not like I'm inside of them and they all have their own personalities and they all have their own stuff that they're bringing to the table and all of that. But I feel like what people are resonating with is getting a sense of from that Baha'i perspective, which is not familiar with most people, right? Like most people have never heard of the Baha'i faith and they hear that they're Baha'is and it's like, well, does that actually have anything to do with what they're doing or saying or, how they're conducting themselves or should it or, any of that kind of stuff. And so I think getting some insight into that resonates with people.
I mean,
Um,
I would agree. That's why I was so excited to have you as a guest and kind of pick your brain. But at the same time, I felt like it would be wonderful to have people actually be able to ask you, that's part of the audience that already watches my content, to be able to ask you questions because I had a feeling that they would ask you questions that I would want to know as well.
yeah.
So the first question comes from Britt. And well, and you probably know Britt. She's a lawyer,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
hopefully, well, I don't know, Britt, if you're going to be watching this, but I'm just saying, I'm hoping that you can be a guest at some point if you would be willing to. But Britt asks, what do you think is missing in the overall discourse?
Yeah. So it feels to me like this case is very much a Rorschach test in a way. Like everybody's looking through their own biased lenses, their own beliefs, their own prejudices, their own sense of righteousness. And, I actually try to seek out some like pro Blake content just to make sure that I'm not sitting in an echo chamber, just reinforcing my own perspectives. And it's fascinating to me to see how, like, we can be looking at exactly the same documents, exactly the same stuff, and come to completely different conclusions. Of course, we're seeing this reflected like in the broader society with everything, right?
Yeah.
Um, so part of what's missing, I think, is just this like, I don't know, sense of maybe humility or recognition that there's probably some nuance there that, you know, um, yeah. And then the other thing that I feel like is missing is, and this is something that I feel strongly about. as a woman, I guess, is that there seems to be a misunderstanding or lack of acknowledgement that women can be the entire range of human. Like, we're capable of the entire full range and spectrum of human behavior, including greed and cruelty and manipulation. And I feel like sometimes what happens in the discourse is that women get reduced to this like damsel in distress caricature where, you know, they really couldn't have done wrong, or they couldn't have made it up. Like they wouldn't, they wouldn't do that. Women wouldn't do that. And despite the fact that I know the statistics about like false allegations and whatnot, and that's a fact, that's why I think we need to believe women initially. But it's not like it never happens. And then the same thing with like flip side, like turning all men into monsters. Like, there's all human beings are capable of the entire range of human behavior. And so I feel like that sometimes is missing. And then also like, the acknowledgement of misogyny and misandry that play a role in the way people respond to the case. And there's a lot of the word misogyny gets thrown around a lot. So that's a part of the discourse. But in some ways, it doesn't feel like it's necessarily being used in a healthy way or a balanced way. Like I see constantly people who are, people who defend Justin being accused of misogyny just off the bat. And the reality is that people on the pro-Justin side also tend to just always poo-poo that idea. Whereas I feel like there are people who are defending Justin and the other men because of misogyny. Like that's true. I think that's absolutely true. I don't think it's most, and it's definitely not all. And whenever somebody is defending them and somebody just says, oh, your misogyny is showing, that's so, I don't know, it's just like this reductive way of shutting down the conversation.
100%.
And only worse is the like, oh, he's not going to sleep with you. Or, oh, like what? That's like misogyny the other way.
Yes.
So weird. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely not something that crossed my mind when I chose to support Justin Baldoni. But one of the things that when you were speaking about, women can be like the gamut of everything, all I could hear was Blake Lively. The multitudes. We are a multitude. It's a, amalgamation.
Yes.
But it is true.
That
So
is
I
true.
give props to Blake Lively for that statement. As much as she used it throughout the promotion, it's true. We are multi-layered. We are capable of the best and the worst.
Yeah. Also, speaking of like things people have said that are from the movie, the other thing that I feel like is not necessarily missing, but I feel like should maybe be missing a little bit more is the whole team thing. And like, I've never been a fan of the like, I'm Team Blake, I'm Team Justin, only because, and no offense to people who use those terms, like I get it, but it feels like it's like, it's just rife with the polarization and tribalism, for lack of a better term, that we see in like partisan politics and all that. It just doesn't sit well with me. Like I was thinking about like when Brendan Splinter said, I'm team, it ends with us. Like I feel like to me it's like team truth and justice. Like that's it. Like that's where people should try to be, and if they end up on one side or the other, of course, but like pitching ourselves to the people just creates this weird like loyalty and stuff that just goes weird. Yeah.
Something that you said that I really appreciated earlier is that, because I believe this too, the default should be believing the victim. Whoever is stating that they are a victim should be believed first. You said one other thing that adds to it, which is with the available information that we have.
Right.
And anybody who had watched me from the beginning, and sometimes I repost things that I said a year ago that I laugh at now. Because it was what I knew at that time.
Right.
Right. And so you can only base things on what you know at the moment.
Right.
And and you know that you are team truth or justice if you are willing to move where the evidence leads you.
Right.
You are not going to be stagnant in one spot. You are willing to go, okay. And this is why I'm incredibly excited that Blake Lively has chosen not to, as far as I know so far, seal her deposition. So we may finally get to hear from her without her lawyers talking on her behalf. So
Mhm.
that is exciting, I think.
Mhm.
But anyways, that's just a side note. As I was listening to you, I was like, oh yeah, those things that you're saying right now really resonate with me. So the next question is from Katie Calloway, a Bocce bestie, and she asks, are there things in the press you wish were corrected?
Um, so really, like, this case more than anything has given me a great deal of skepticism about the press, which is really depressing because I actually defended the media for a long time when it was, being attacked and whatnot for political reasons. And but I've been really dismayed by the coverage of this case since the New York Times. And so I'm thankful for like the lawyers, like not actually Golden, who point out how bad the legal coverage has been. As far as the Baha'i Faith goes, it actually hasn't been too terrible in the press. Like, it feels like most outlets have kind of been trying to avoid saying too much or bring the faith into it, which is wise, honestly. They'd probably butcher it, but most of like the misinformation that I've seen about the faith has been in comment sections and discussions
Mm.
online. So, but I do wish that the press just covered the actual case more accurately because, yeah, it's been a mess.
Yeah, I will agree. There's so many things that you're saying right now, Annie, that I resonate with because I was the same way. I really believed in the journalistic integrity of folks because I needed to. In a
Mhm.
lot, I mean, if I'm going to be honest, I needed to believe in that, especially in times like now. We need to be able to trust our news,
Yeah.
and if we can't, it gets difficult. And so. Um, One of the things I had always said is news organizations have to take ownership of the distrust that has happened over the years.
Mm,
They can't continue to pretend like they didn't have a part in why people distrust certain news outlets or all news outlets at this point.
mhm.
Um, because before people used to like segregate in their perspective like news outlets that they supported, but then now it's like, no, I don't think I even trust anybody that I thought I trusted before. We should be fact checkers in general anyway. And I always tell people, fact check me. I do not believe in the source of trust me, bro.
Yeah.
And I said, and I would never actively deceive people, but I'm also a human being. And so
Mm.
tell me if I'm wrong about something
Right.
because those facts affect my feelings, but my feelings also affect the way I view the facts. So it's a very circular thing.
Yeah.
But yes, I absolutely appreciate you recognizing or speaking on that because I feel the same way, and it makes me very, very sad, especially at this time in our work, just the state of our country and our world right now. So,
Yeah. It's scary to not feel like you know where to go to find accurate, information. And the problem is people they lose trust in like the mainstream media, which is still probably the best in terms of accuracy or what, people tend to then go to like fringe extremes instead, thinking that that's more accurate. But oh my gosh, no, like, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So it's just learning how to return critical thinking back into spaces. How do we fact check? How do we do anything that we do? Um, so the next question is from Rachel's View, another bocce bestie.
Mhm.
And she asks, what are the biggest misconceptions about your religion?
Oh gosh, I mean, the first one is that it's a cult. That's the one that gets thrown around most often. But if you do any kind of digging at all, like if the Baha'i Faith is a cult, then literally every major world religion is a cult. So, I mean, there's some people that do believe that, but like, yeah, it's not a cult. Another one is that it's like a sect of Islam, or even like an offshoot of Islam, which offshoot isn't like entirely inaccurate because it came from like it kind of arose out of an Islamic society, but it's kind of like saying that Christianity is an offshoot of Judaism. Like it's not really the way that people talk about it. And it sort of displays like a fundamental like misunderstanding of the independent nature of the Baha'i faith, and how it's connected to all major religions, not just Islam. And then the other thing I guess is that there's anything like weird about it. I saw a comment in some place, I can't remember, Reddit or something, and it said that the Baha'i faith had no, it was in a comment on a TikTok video. It said the Baha'i faith had some weird views about childbirth, and I was like, huh? Like, because like I mean, I've been a Baha'i my whole life. I've never heard anything about childbirth from the Baha'i teachings. And so I went and looked to see if I could find anything. And no, there's nothing. There's like, nothing.
Do you recall what they were saying? What's the weird
No, that was
thing?
literally all they said was like, yeah, the Baha'i faith has some weird views on childbirth. And I don't know if they were just assuming because of the stuff about birth in the like case or something. I don't know. I mean, I've known Baha'is who've had like, home birth, water births, all the way up through, planned C-sections. Like there's not a standard like high perspective on childbirth.
So maybe they were just not people that enjoyed water births, because that might have been the only idea that they had that they were talking about. Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. But that's really
Well,
kind of the biggest ones. Yeah.
okay. Well, Gilda J. Garcia asks, do Baha'i people preach their religion to others and or actively recruit?
Okay. So Baha'is are not supposed to proselytize, but we are supposed to share the faith. Like there's no pushing, no pressuring or anything like that. But if we didn't teach people about it, nobody would ever learn about it. So, we're supposed to be open and about the faith and share it with people who are interested. But preaching or proselytizing or pushing it on people, no, we're not supposed to do that.
All right. Maladaptive.malady asks, how does the Baha'i faith view women?
So the Baha'i faith has some core like principles, central principles, and they include things like the oneness of humankind, universal peace, universal education, the independent investigation of truth, the harmony of science and religion, and the equality of men and women is one of those like core principles. So women are seen as equal to men. Men and women are viewed as there's an analogy of men and women being like two wings of a bird, the bird of humanity. And if both wings are not equally developed, then the bird can't fly. And the wing of women has only been like weak because of a lack of opportunity in education historically. Nothing because of inequality. So once women are able to reach their full potential because they're given all of the opportunities and education and whatnot, then hopefully the bird of humanity will fly a little bit more straight.
Well, the next question is kind of adjacent to it, but not necessarily, because not everyone chooses motherhood. But I don't know how to say the name quite yet, but I think it's Lao Danny. Well, I'm just gonna spell it LAUDANIFAVES 1. Asks, what is the Baha'i perspective on motherhood?
So motherhood is revered in the Baha'i faith. I think like the way that it should be. Like there's a quote that says, I'll just read it because I saved it here. O ye loving mothers, know ye that in God's sight the best of all ways to worship him is to educate the children and train them in all the perfections of humankind. And no nobler deed than this can be imagined. So there's a lot of emphasis on like educating women because women tend to be the first educators of children, and that's how humanity is going to progress. But that the idea that this like the work of motherhood is the noblest of deeds, like to me that feels like an upliftment, an elevation of the work of motherhood. Um, when it comes to the allegation, which isn't really an allegation, right? Like it's not officially a complaint, but there's been the thing about Jenny Slate having an issue with the wording of the sanctity of motherhood. We don't actually know like what exactly was said and what exactly was the problem. So it's hard to talk about this in terms of the context of the case. But the only things that I can think of that might be like sort of the only way I can think somebody might take offense to something that might have been said about the sanctity of motherhood is either just that it was like kind of expressed as a religious view, and maybe just having anything religious expressed is uncomfortable for some people. Maybe that could be it. The other thing that I wonder is if it could be like a conflation of like religious views of motherhood and women, where there are certain religious perspectives on motherhood that sort of like seem like they're elevating motherhood, but really it's sort of like limiting women to that role, that's
Mm.
like the key, like the only role that women have or the absolute most important role kind of a thing. Um, and that somehow their other accomplishments or endeavors or whatever are less worthy. Like maybe that's a misunderstanding of what was being said. I don't know. That's the best guesses I have as to how
I
that could
mean,
help.
I think that latter guess is probably the closer one, um, based off of what we've heard from Jenny Slate, other interviews, or I mean, or what I've heard. I don't know if you've listened to any Jenny Slate interviews, but I feel like it's more likely that
Mhm.
second one that
Yeah.
you're guessing.
So
Um,
there's not at all any kind of like a woman's place is in the home kind of messaging in the Baha'i faith. So like, if Jamie was speaking from a Baha'i perspective on this, it genuinely would have been we recognize that you are a mom, that, you deserve to be supported in being a mom and working on this film. And we want to make things as comfortable as possible for you because we believe motherhood is super important. You know what I mean? Like that would be the messaging. It wouldn't be anything trying to limit her as a woman.
yeah. No, that's really helpful to know, and thank you for reminding us that is what compelled that person to ask, because these questions are actually much longer, and I had to choose just a sentence or so to be able to share with you.
Mm.
But some folks really wrote more of a background to each of their questions, so hopefully they don't mind that it's actually just dwindled down to a specific question. But the next question is Casper the Ragdoll asks, what does the Baha'i faith believe about the afterlife?
I'm loving hearing people's usernames. That's so funny. Oh, so the afterlife. Okay. Gosh, these are like big questions. So Baha'is believe that the soul is eternal and that this like earthly life is just the first stage in the life of the soul. And that after our body dies, our soul progresses through other worlds of God. Um, we don't believe in heaven and hell in the like traditional sense of like places where your soul goes when you die, but rather like heaven is a spiritual state of closeness or nearness to God, and hell is a spiritual state of being remote from God. And so we grow closer to God or closer to heaven through prayer and meditation, through service to humanity, and through developing. I did a whole video about this, about developing our spiritual qualities through practicing them in this world. So things like love and kindness and justice and steadfastness and honesty and trustworthiness and compassion, like all of those things we think of as like good character qualities. Um, that's how we like grow closer to God. And so, but when we die, we all go to the same place. Like it's hard because like time and place are not, those are like physical things in this realm of existence. So it's always hard to talk about the afterlife because there's just so much mysteriousness to it that we can't fully, our finite minds can't like wrap our brains around. Um, and so, but there is an analogy in the Baha'i writings about how our experience in this earthly life versus our experience in the next world after we die can be compared to the life of a baby in the womb versus the baby's life outside of it. So, as a baby is growing and developing in the womb, it's building arms and legs and eyes and fingers and ears and all of those things that it's going to use in this, outside world. It uses them in the womb too, but like it just kicks around and, it sees a little bit of light and it can hear some sounds, um, but the full purpose and capacity of those limbs and senses are only fully realized in this world once it comes out, right? And so similarly, our souls in this world are building spiritual strengths and that are definitely useful and necessary in this world. And, but we build them by practicing them here. Um, but they'll be more fully realized, like what they're really for will be more fully realized in the next world. And so this world in some sense is a preparation for the next, kind of like a baby in the womb is preparing to, come out into this world. But that preparation involves like striving to be the best and highest version of ourselves while we're here, and also like working to make the world a better place. So the afterlife is just like the next stage in our spiritual existence. We're told that it's unspeakably glorious. Um, but beyond that, we don't fully know like what that's going to be like because, again, finite minds.
Thanks. Okay, so unseen underscore stranger asks, do Baha'i people believe they can talk to the souls of deceased people? And obviously, you know what prompted that question in regards to Blake Lively's allegations towards Justin Baldoni. So
Yeah. Yeah. So I can't speak for what Justin was. I mean, again, we're getting like different versions of things. And I don't know what Justin was doing in that sense. But so to answer the question though, do Baha'is believe that they can talk to the souls of deceased people? Like, yes and no. Like, souls in the next world are as like close to us, but also as separate from us as that baby in the womb is from the outside world here. So we just like don't really have the ability to really know like what that relationship is to the souls in the next world, even though we know that they are so close to us. And as far as talking to souls in the next world, like, sure, we can talk to them. Like, my mother-in-law passed away 10 years ago. And like every once in a while, I'll be like, hey, Judy, I could use a little help with whatever, like, but it's not like calling somebody on the phone or something. Not like a normal like conversation that we're having with souls in the next world. We have some specific prayers that have been given to us that are for the departed, that's sort of like praying for their progress in the next world. But um there's not a it's not a like, I don't know how to like it's not like a seance-y kind of like I'm really interacting with a spirit kind of a thing. It's a much more sort of maybe mystical, mysterious thing that I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's as a generalization, but I feel like most people who believe in a soul and an afterlife, like, have some kind of sense of like speaking to the ancestors or calling on the ancestors or, something like that, where there's, I don't know, some sense of like connection there.
connection still.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But again, it's not like calling on the phone and having a conversation. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
there's
mean,
actually
my
a quote. I saved a quote. I'll just read it just because I think it
yeah.
makes a little bit of like, I don't know. Again, all this stuff is super mysterious. So, not just from a Baha'i perspective, just like, right? Like we're talking about our souls and what happens after we die. Like, really? No. But it says, this is a quote from the writings that says, those who have passed on through death have a sphere of their own. It is not removed from ours. Their work, the work of the kingdom, is ours, but it is sanctified from what we call time and place. Time with us is measured by the sun. When there's no more sunrise, no more sunset, that kind of time does not exist for man. Those who have ascended have different attributes from those who are still on earth, yet there is no real separation. So take from that,
Yeah.
if you will.
I was just gonna say, when my friend who had passed away last year, and it was, oh my word, it's not even last year anymore. Oh my word, that's so wild.
Mhm.
He passed away September 27, 2024, Van Zandt Day, which interestingly enough, and then my dad passed away December 2, 2024. But it is one of those things where you're like, do I still like say, "Hey, Chad," you know?
Mhm.
Do I
Right.
do I go to visit his grave and I still talk to him and say, "Hey, I just wanna give you an update on what's been going on,"
Mhm.
and does it make me like, I don't know the connection necessarily, but it makes me feel still connected to him,
Yeah.
um, to be able to do that. I mean, it's kinda like sometimes the stories where folks were, like, texting on an old phone number that used to be that person's, and it turned out somebody else was had the phone number by that point, but you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I think when we lose people, it's we find ways to still feel connected to them. It doesn't matter how many years or decades pass. I mean,
Yeah.
I was watching a TikTok video just recently with, and it was a grandmother. I think it was a grandmother. Yeah, that she has dementia, and for 5 minutes, like the dementia was gone.
Yes, I
Yeah,
saw
and
that.
and for her graduation,
Yeah.
and the tears rolling down her face because it was like, ooh, because you want you want to feel connected to the people. And so that made me think of my grandma. And then I
Mm,
started crying as I
yeah.
watched that video because it brought me back to how close my grandma and I were. And I used to visit her every single day, like at least a year before she passed away. And then had to go further away from where I was, so I couldn't visit her every day. But
Mhm.
when she was next door, I used to just walk over every single day and spend time with her.
Yeah.
And so I think, I can only guess that Justin Baldoni most likely was trying to comfort Blake, and it landed poorly and may not have come out the way that it probably needed to. And because it is a very sensitive thing when you've lost somebody that means a lot to you. And I think that's something that I maybe Justin didn't realize the impacts of some of those words. So I can understand her feeling her way, the whatever way she was feeling about it.
Mm.
Um, it's still not SH, but
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
it I can understand
Yeah.
her perspective and feeling.
Well, and we don't even
You know,
know really what was said,
that's true.
like
I'm just saying if I give her the benefit of doubt of like portraying that accurately and not something that I can understand like the sensitivity with death and
for
losing
sure,
loved ones.
for sure.
So,
And there's also um there's some references in the Baha'i writings to like the souls in the next world being ready to assist us if we need it. So like there are times like I my daughter plays the violin and she was auditioning for some kind of like award thing or something like that. And I remember right now like I wasn't able to it was like a closed audition, so I wasn't able to go watch it. But I remember sitting in my car and just like doing a little like mental like asking Beethoven to sort of like sounds so funny, but I was like, it can't hurt, right? Like, you never
yeah.
know. You might be up there just waiting for musicians to ask for a little inspiration. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay, so Lisi, another Bocce bestie, asks, and actually Lisi had a lot of great questions. So
Mm,
to distill it down to one, it was just kind of just based off of like the other questions I was asking you. So I chose this one, but Lisi had a lot of great ones. Said, what concerns you most when religion becomes part of public discourse around accusations, um, especially for victims, faith communities, and truth seeking? And I will say too, real quick, I think Lisi is a Bocce bestie. I know I have a Lisi that's a Bocce bestie.
yeah. I don't know whether to answer this like in terms of like religion in general or like specifically the Baha'i faith becoming part of this, but I'll speak specifically to the Baha'i faith, I guess. So, honestly, like what has concerned me with this case is because Baha'is in Iran, which is the birthplace of the Baha'i faith, are still persecuted by the Islamic regime there. Um, and it always worries me when there's misinformation about the faith that gets spread. Um, because it puts Baha'is there, especially in danger. So, like, one example, like, I've seen comments throughout the whole entire case. Every once in a while, people will pop in and call some of the Baha'is in the case Zionists. And Baha'is are not Zionists. Like, Baha'is, we have our Holy Land in Haifa, Israel, because that's where Baha'u'llah, the founder of the faith, his final exile sent him there. And that's where his remains and the remains of other holy figures in the faith are interred. And so our world headquarters is there and has been there since the 19th century when it was still called Palestine. And, I'm not going to get into all of the Israel Palestine stuff for sure, but Baha'is don't and have never taken any stance on like the political boundary questions at the heart of that back and forth in that part of the world. And yet, because we have our Holy Land and World Center there, and Baha'is go there for pilgrimage, people sometimes erroneously label Baha'is as Zionists. And that's actually dangerous rhetoric because it's what the government in Iran uses against the Baha'is also. Like they accuse Baha'is of being spies for Israel or Zionist agitators and all kinds of false things in order to continue their persecution against the Baha'is. So that's a concern that I have when misinformation about the Baha'i faith comes up is the safety of Baha'is in Iran and Yemen and some other places where Baha'is are persecuted by oppressive regimes and where misinformation can be misused against them. And then the other, I guess, like concern that I have, and this is about any religion really, like, is when people have a tendency to generalize. And so if people generalize about a faith based on the actions of an individual or how they interpret the actions of an individual of that faith, and I mean, there's all kinds of people in every faith, right? Like, I do think because of what the Baha'i Faith like emphasizes and based on my own experience, that the vast majority of Baha'is are pretty awesome people. But there are, of course, like exceptions. I'm not talking about in this case, like that's not a underhanded, like slight or any hint at anything at all. It's just that there's a danger in generalizing, especially I think with a faith that people don't know a lot about. Like if these are the only people, that anybody's ever known or known of who are Baha'is, and if they're looking at this case through a particular lens, like they could make all kinds of terrible generalizations about Baha'is. And so that's another concern that I have.
Great, thank you. Well, the next one is Healing Flow Practice asks, how can spiritual communities uphold compassion, grace, and unity without enabling abuse, minimizing survivors' experiences, or placing disproportionate responsibility on those harmed?
Yeah, this is a big question, and I'm not sure if I'm like totally qualified to answer it, to be honest. But I think on one hand, you have to really like take things on a case by case basis. There's so many circumstances in every individual case that makes it unique. Um, but there is a principle that I may or may not like explain very well. But the gist is that institutions prioritize justice on behalf of the whole, on the behalf of a community or society, and individuals prioritize mercy and compassion. Um, for the good of society, like justice has to take precedence over forgiveness when there's criminal activity or abuse or things like that involved. Um, but like we don't dispense justice on an individual level, right? So we have governments and judicial systems and institutions for that like collective purpose of dispensing justice. Dispensing justice is a weird term. Making sure justice is served. I don't know what the right terminology is, but like I can have compassion for a criminal and still want to ensure that that person is held accountable and responsible for their crimes. And I think that's it's a perfectly compatible with faith and religion to believe that. That's kind of the way that the Baha'i Faith views it, I guess. Like, yes, we need to be forgiving individually as a society. We can't always be forgiving because criminals or people with bad intentions would just continue to do what they're doing. So, as far as the kind of the rest of the question about without minimizing survivors' experiences or placing disproportionate responsibility on those harmed. I mean, I don't know. It's, um, obviously, like there have been some pretty heinous things that have been done in the name of religion or done within religions, not necessarily in the name of religion, but, the Catholic Church had its own whole thing with abuse and covering up abuse and all of that. So um, I think, again, having institutions in place that are, I mean, I don't know. I can only look at this through a Baha'i lens. So we have like elected institutions, democratically elected institutions, spiritual assemblies that operate at the local level, the national level, and the international level, um, that administer to the needs of the faith. And then there are some appointed individuals that serve as sort of like, almost like guidance counselors, maybe, but they don't have any authority. So the authority rests with the institutions, which are made up of like 9 people. So there's not as much of a like risk or danger, I guess, of like individuals abusing power without being checked, or like there's places to go with issues that have like, I don't know, there's guidance with how to handle all that stuff, and it's handled by these elected institutions. So it's not that everything's, always done perfectly, but there's much, much less of a risk of like, I don't know, individual abuse of power, if that makes sense. But I'm not even sure if that's kind of what this person is even referring to. So,
Honestly, is making me think of a different question, and I'm like, I wanted to keep it to 17 questions, but I'm a part of me is like, oh, because of that anti-Baha'i post making some connotations about how Justin wants to be like the Tom Cruise of the Baha'i faith, and also something about like a wizard, or I don't know, like a power player or whatever. I don't know the phrasing of it. And so as I was listening to you, it made me think about like, so there is none of that like possibility anyway within this
well,
particular faith.
no, let me put it this way. So, yeah, there are like some famous Baha'is, right? We've got like Rainn Wilson's a Baha'i, and Justin and Penn Badgley, Andy Grammer. Like, none of those people are ever used as spokespeople for the Baha'i faith. Like, never. I've never seen it happen. Like, they are Baha'is and they're open about the fact they're Baha'is, but they're not official representatives of the faith in any kind of way. And they wouldn't be. Like, that's not the way things function. And it's not the way. Yeah. So, this idea of like being I don't know. Was it saying like trying to be like the face of the faith? I don't
I
know.
mean, they were saying that they were trying to be equal to, or the equivalent of Tom Cruise to Scientology is what Baldoni wanted to be for the Baha'i faith.
That does not that doesn't ring true to me at all. Like, yeah, I don't know, but yeah, that doesn't sound.
So Josie, Bocce Bestie asks, what do the Baha'i principles slash teachings say about what justice would look like?
Um, I think what justice would look like really depends on individual circumstances. Like, as a whole, it means that the rights of everybody are upheld and that the dignity and equality of all people are acknowledged. Um, as far as in this case, I can't say what justice should look like or would look like. The only thing that I can say, like, with certainty is that truth needs to be the foundation of it. You know, those who committed wrongdoing should be held accountable. Those who are victims of injustice should have their rights upheld. Um, but you can't have justice without truth. So, like, that's, yeah. I don't know what justice looks like. I mean, I have some of my own like ideas, but I don't. That's more my personal thoughts. Like, I can't really speak through a Baha'i lens about what justice would look like in this case.
So it looks different every single time. That the
Yeah,
only thing, the through line is truth.
truth. Yes.
Well, I mean, that's still in itself helpful, right?
Yeah.
Um, so Ralph 1833, a bocce buddy, asks, as a member of the Baha'i faith, what concerns do you have around anything that either Justin, Jamie, or Steve may have said or done that could be used against them to try and discredit their commitment to the Baha'i faith and ultimately weaken their defense in this case?
Mm. Okay, so I mean, of course, I have like concerns, but I'm not willing to go into any specifics because that's just too easy to like. I'm not going to sit in a place of judgment. I feel like it's. I feel like I do think that there's for some people there's this expectation of perfection. It feels like. Which is impossible, and also especially under the extraordinarily difficult circumstances that these people found themselves in. Um, I'm actually more concerned, I guess, with the way that anything and everything gets twisted. Um, but also, people are gonna do what they're gonna do. And, we've seen Jamie especially saying this over and over in some of their messages that like, let people, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. People are gonna believe what they're gonna believe. Um, but I will say this is something that I feel like might get missed is that I think there's probably a tendency for some people to think, well, they say they're Baha'is, but they're not really like living like Baha'is should be living, or they're doing things that are against the Baha'i teachings or whatever like that. Like, they're just Baha'is in name only. And really, they're these terrible people. I mean, I've literally seen people say they're terrible people, which is really hurtful. Um, but here's the thing about like the idea of being a Baha'i in name only. So there's no social capital to be had by saying you're a Baha'i. Like, there's social capital to be had by saying you're a Christian in our society. There's power in that. There's influence in that. I mean, lots of it right now with the way our government is and stuff. And then there's also just kind of a shielding, maybe, or a presumption of virtue if you say that you are a Christian because people are really familiar with Christianity. But like, there's no benefit like that to saying you're a Baha'i because most people have never even heard of it. Like, if you say I'm a Baha'i, like, you have to explain it. Like, people's first reaction isn't like, oh, that must mean you're a really good person. It usually just means like, but what? Or like, oh, is that a cult? Like, you get all of this kind of response. So the only times that I guess I've ever observed somebody who I might describe as Baha'i in name only are people who maybe like they grew up in the faith, but they're not really practicing anymore. And, they're Baha'i, but they don't ever tell people that, or, they're not really practicing at all. But if you are a Baha'i who is openly sharing your faith, which all three of these men do, like if you listen to any interview with Steve Sarowitz, constantly brings the topic back to the Baha'i Faith. Like, every question comes back to something about the Baha'i Faith. And if you listen to Jamie and Justin's podcast or interviews as well, like they're very open about their faith. And in my experience, again, like having been a Baha'i forever, like you don't do that if you're just a Baha'i in name only. Like, the Baha'i Faith is not a like go to church on Sunday and then forget about religion for the rest of the week kind of a faith. Like, if you are talking about the faith and sharing the faith, I mean, in my experience, it's not a thing that you're not at least striving to be and live by the Baha'i teachings. Like, there would be no benefit to doing that, probably especially in Hollywood. I know Rain has talked about like being the weird God guy when he talks about religion in Hollywood, because it's a place where that's just not really cool. um, so yeah, they wouldn't get anything out of saying they were Baha'is and then just, throwing all of that out the window and not even trying to be what they're purporting to be.
Which actually, I want to go back up to an earlier question, which talked about like, do Baha'i folks like preach their religion and all these different things, right?
Yeah.
So to be a practicing Baha'i, you would talk about your faith, right? So how is it handled if someone expresses like, I don't want to hear about it, which I feel like Blake Lively may have had that vibe potentially.
I kind of wonder. I wonder about that. No, if somebody expresses that they're not interested, we're not supposed to push at all. Like, we just leave them be. Like, that's no, there's
So
not.
you just never speak about it
Yeah,
with that person ever again.
yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've known Baha'is who just can't help themselves. Like,
Because it's just an extension of who you are as a person.
they are, right.
So
Like,
it almost feels like you're suppressing a part of yourself to be in company with somebody else, but you're trying to figure
right.
out like the line of what, like, how can I be myself still and yet also respect how this person needs me to show up
Yeah.
as well. I don't.
Yeah. I mean, for most Baha'is, I would say, like, it's the operating force in your life. Like, it's the North Star that everything points back to. And it's the way that you live and the way that you are in the world, and all of it comes through what you say and do. But I mean, it doesn't have to be like overtly like talking about the Baha'i faith or talking about the Baha'i teachings. A lot of it's just, the example of your character and those kinds of things and the way that you choose to live your life. But yeah, no, if somebody says like, yeah, I'm not really interested, we're not at all supposed to push. Like, that's no. Let them.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. So Vanessa Horn, a bocce buddy, who asked, will Justin's faith and wanting peace potentially influence them to settle, or are there other Baha'i values that will drive them forward?
So settlement has always been an interesting question in this case. I've thought since the beginning that the only way that they would settle, and I don't know this, this is just my own personal perspective, was if there was some kind of an admission that cleared their names of the allegations. I think that the desire for peace passed its natural threshold at some point along the line, when it became clear that truth and justice needed to take precedent. And, the sense I get, and they even said as much in their lawsuit that this was not a story that they ever intended to tell. And, you know, even after that threshold was passed for them personally, but once the New York Times and the, CRD came out and their names were just hammered in the public, the only way really for them to get their side of the story out without having to wait a year or more for, the court, if she had sued and they didn't, like, they would have had to wait a long time to get their side of the story told and sit in that space of having these, terrible allegations hanging over them and people believing what they would naturally believe without hearing the other side of the story. So, um, I think that at this point, it's really just about making sure that the truth is understood and that justice is seen. And if that could happen through settlement, then I imagine they would all rather just be done with this. Like, I would. Like, it's got to be exhausting. But I don't believe that they would ever settle if truth and justice had to be sacrificed for it.
That is great to hear.
I mean, I could
you
be wrong, but
I mean,
that's
if it's the underlying thing that would supersede like this, like, oh, let's just kumbaya it. It's like, well, but there was one quote you said before, and I said it in a live, um, but you said it in one of your videos, and I really loved it, about like the deceiver, the
oh, right.
thief, something or other.
Yeah,
Um,
we're supposed to treat everyone with compassion. I'm gonna, like, paraphrase, but yeah, everybody we come across with compassion and kindness, except the liar, the deceiver no, the tyrant, the deceiver, and the thief. Because rather than, um, you know, when you're kind to them, rather than helping them see the error of their ways, they just think that you're deceived and they'll just continue to do what they're doing.
yeah. I mean, when I read or heard you say that quote, and then I went to find it, I was like, this for me, it reminded me of Blake.
Mm.
And so I was like, they're gonna fight to the end then, if that's the case. From Trish CK-2025, a bocce buddy, and asks, as a member of the Baha'i Faith, what are some ways that Justin, Jamie, or Steve might be staying grounded during this difficult time?
I mean, I'm sure that there's, like, a ton of prayer happening, um, probably individually and collectively. I know that they all have very strong family ties and a ton of support in that area, so I imagine that they're really being sustained by that love and support. Um, and I can't say this for sure, but based on what I know about them and about Baha'is in general, they're probably looking for ways to be of service to others. This is probably taking a huge toll, but it's also like, you know, doing something to help others often helps us get out of that space of, like, feeling like we're focusing so much on ourselves, which they have to with this case, right? Like, they don't have a choice but to go through this process at this point. Um, but yeah, when we're feeling that, we try to figure out how we can be helpful and of service to others.
All right. Thank you so much for that. So, Annie, thank you for being my first guest on 17 Questions with Bocce. Is there something that you want to promote, like a page that people can follow you on or anything like that?
You can follow me on TikTok if you want. It's annie.loves.travel. I don't post all the time, but that's if I have something to say about this case or, the Baha'i elements of it for some insights, like, that's where it's going to be. So, yeah, feel free there. And thank you so much, Bachi. This has been great. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I'm honored to
It's
be the first one.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you were available and willing, and I'm excited for what the series can be. And so I'm glad you were able to come too. So if folks really liked anything that they heard from either you or me or anything in this video, feel free to like this video and also either follow Annie on TikTok or me or subscribe to me on YouTube. So hopefully folks can watch the next video, which is going to be with Sarah of Yarn and Order. So the questions when you're starting to think about what to give is going to be around her background in doing like jury duty stuff. So if you know Sarah at Yarn and Order and already have some questions you want to ask her, or if you're hearing about Sarah for the very first time, again, check out her YouTube and her TikTok. It's still at Yarn and Order. And so I'm looking forward to what kind of questions all of you ask. Thanks. See you next time.